had descended upon the quiet expanses of American countryside, and I was still navigating through winding roads. Ghostly shadows of trees slowly melded with the darkness of the sky, and my car barely made a sound on the secluded road. I had long lost my bearings and realized that I was lost. Yet further down the road, I witnessed even stranger things. Figures in black cloaks flitted among the trees, their silhouettes barely discernible in the gloom. In some places, they seemed transparent, like ghosts wandering in this grim forest. My heart pounded harder, and I tried to cross this remote stretch of road as quickly as possible. Soon, before me rose an abandoned house, as if discarded on the edge of the forest. It looked ominous. Windows were shattered, the roof partially collapsed, and the walls were covered in moss and lichen. In my mind, the thought of turning back crossed, but then I noticed that the road I came on had disappeared, as if dissolved into the night. A vague sense compelled me towards this abandoned house. I cautiously stepped out of the car and approached it, as if magnetically drawn to its sinister aura. Inside, it was dark, with only the pale light of the moon filtering through the cracked windows, illuminating dusty furniture and crumbling walls. Suddenly, I heard whispers, indistinct rustlings, and knocks. My heart raced, and I pressed myself against the wall, trying to summon courage. But then I noticed that the shadows which had flickered among the trees now gathered around the house, as if awaiting something. Something urged me to venture further into this abandoned estate. My steps were uncertain, but I kept moving, as if an inner voice pushed me forward. Ascending the stairs to the second floor felt endless, and each creak of the wooden steps sounded like an invitation into a world of mysteries and dangers. When I reached the top, I saw her. She stood there, in the center of the abandoned room, with a grim glow in her eyes. It was a woman in a long black dress, her face adorned with deathly pale patches. I froze in place, unable to move or utter a sound. "You're lost, traveler," her voice echoed, like a whisper among graves. "But now you're here, where cursed souls find solace." I tried to open my mouth to respond, but the words stuck in my throat. I felt fear paralyzing me, enveloping my being with its cold fingers. Yet something inside me compelled me to keep listening. She told me a story of how this house became a haven for those who lost their way in this world. She spoke of ghosts whose souls wandered around the forest, and how they found their sanctuary in these ruins. When she finished her tale, she reached out her hand. "Join us," she said, "and you'll find solace in this world of shadows." I felt like I had to make a choice. Stay here, in this abandoned house surrounded by ghosts, or run, venture back into the path and try to find my way back to reality. With a heavy heart, I turned away from this dark figure and began descending the stairs. Step by step, I walked away from this place, from the world of shadows and ghosts, but they remained with me in my nightmares. Since then, I never got lost on those forgotten roads again, and I avoided even glancing towards that accursed house. But sometimes in the darkness of the night, I still hear their whispers, the shadows left behind, never to leave me. As I stepped out of that abandoned house and found myself in the open air again, I felt relief flooding my heart. I got into the car and sped away, trying to leave behind this nightmarish experience. I was driving on an empty road for a long time alone, until the road led me to a small town where there were very few people dressed in very old clothes. I entered a cafe and sat down at a table. The waitress approached me, and I asked her what kind of abandoned town this was. She told me that they couldn't escape from this town because dark forces and evil creatures appeared at night. The road, like a serpent, wound through empty spaces, as if guided by an unknown force. The wind whispered riddles, and my car raced forward as if an insect caught in the web of destiny. And here it was, the thread of fate that led me to this forgotten corner of the world. The small town, enveloped in the darkness of the past, embraced me with its murky arms. The people here seemed like lost souls, clad in patchwork garments of time. I stepped into the cafe, as if entering a portal to truth, and sat at a modest table, immersing myself in the mysterious atmosphere of this place. The waitress approached me. Her eyes were like mirrors of the past, reflecting the secrets of this town. I asked her about the secret that lay beyond the visible. "What lies behind these walls?" I asked, piercingly, knowing that the answer might reveal the frightening truth. Her voice was a whisper in the darkness, like a ghost emerging from the grave of memory. "This town is a dark prisoner of its own destiny. We are here, like forgotten toys in the hands of a sinister player. Dark forces hold us captive, not allowing us to escape from this labyrinth of nightmares." My gaze slid to the window, and I saw shadows dancing in the streets, like ghosts eager to reclaim these places. "And what are these dark forces?" I asked, feeling fear clutching at my heart. "They are the architects of our nightmares, the creators of our fears," she continued, her voice sounding like the creak of a rusty door leading into the abyss. They are something we cannot comprehend or explain. They come in the night, devouring everything in their path, and no one dares to venture out onto the streets after sunset. My hands trembled as I stood up, preparing to leave this place, but she grabbed me by the hand, as if she were the last ship tethered to the earth before a storm. "Beware of the night," she whispered, her words sounding like a warning from the past. "It hides secrets best kept at bay. But if you still decide to embark on this journey, be careful. The dark forces do not forgive mistakes." I left the cafe, but the waitress's words stayed with me, like a shadow unwilling to part. I resolved to find the truth behind these walls, to unravel the mysteries of this town, and to free its inhabitants from the clutches of darkness. But I knew that on the path to this truth, many trials awaited me, and fear my faithful companion in this journey into the world of shadows and mysticism. On the winter road, where the silence was so thick that I could hear my own breath, I drove through snow-covered expanses. Night was falling slowly, as if enveloping the mountains in its dark cloak. My car slowly made its way along the winding path, and the beams of the headlights illuminated only a small stretch ahead of me, as if emerging from the mist. In the distance beyond the wall of trees, there loomed a small house. It looked lonely and abandoned, but the light shining through its windows beckoned me, inviting me to stay the night. Such a prospect seemed appealing in these harsh conditions. I stood up and adjusted my scarf nervously, then carefully turned onto the narrow path leading to the mysterious dwelling. Ahead was something surreal, something resembling a scene from a nightmare. The house seemed to alternate between appearing close and receding into the depths of darkness, toying with my senses. Approaching it, I felt a chill piercing me to the bone. There was something pounding in my chest like a sense of impending doom, but I pushed aside that fear and decided to stop. My car braked, and I stepped out into the darkness. As I approached the door, it slowly creaked open, as if someone had been expecting my arrival. My frozen fingers touched the door handle, and I entered, forcing myself to swallow the lump in my throat. Inside, it was pitch black, and I felt my heart racing. I fumbled for the switch and turned on the light. The room turned out to be small and cozy, but something was off. The air smelled musty, and in the corners of the room, clusters of shadows seemed alive, as if harboring entities within them. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper, like a rustle among the shadows. I turned around, but there was no one in the room. My heart began to race even faster, and I tried to find an explanation for the sound. Perhaps it was just the echo of my own thoughts trying to unravel the mystery of this house. Carefully, I moved into another room, where I found a fireplace, its dark abyss gaping in the wall. The fire in it flickered, as if trying to ward off the cold, but the shadow it cast seemed deeper and darker than usual. I decided to approach closer to warm myself, but suddenly the flames stirred as if coming to life, and I heard whispers emanating from them. There were words in the local dialect, words I couldn't understand, but their sound sent shivers down my spine. In a panic, I recoiled, and the flames in the fireplace returned to flickering calmly, as if nothing had happened. I realized I needed to leave this place, but at that moment the light went out, engulfing the room in darkness. My heart constricted with fear, and I panicked, rushing towards the exit, but the door slammed shut in front of me, as if a living being unwilling to let me go. I pounded on it with my fists, screaming desperately, but my voice sounded muffled and faded in this ominous place. The shadow filled the room, and I felt something approaching, something evil and incomprehensible. At that moment, I knew I had to translate on a translation software as the scene unfolded in my mind. My heart froze as I heard the approaching footsteps. The shadow grew denser, and I realized that there was something unholy in this house, something that should not exist in the realm of reality. I closed my eyes and cursed my unlucky choice. Suddenly, the footsteps halted, as if awaiting my next move. A spark of hope ignited in my soul. Perhaps I could still escape this nightmare. With all my strength, I turned towards the door and attempted to break free once more. But at that moment, the house trembled, as if its foundations were crumbling, and I felt the walls slowly shifting, pressing me towards the very center of the nightmare. My heart pounded as I realized there was no escape here. The shadow took shape, slowly emerging from the darkness. It was a woman or something resembling one. Her eyes were vacant and restless, as if she were a prisoner of eternal darkness. "You should not have come here," she whispered, her voice echoing from the past. "This is my place. You have disrupted the balance." My legs refused to move, as if tethered to the floor of this accursed house. I was ensnared in her trap, with no way back. "Who are you?" I blurted out, my voice trembling with fear. "I was forgotten," she replied, her eyes gleaming in the darkness. "But now I am freed, and you have become next on my list." Clutching my teeth in fear, I tried to recall every moment of my life, every decision, every word, but nothing could save me from this wretched fate. The shadow drew closer, and I felt its cold breath on my face. Then I realized I had only one choice to accept my fate. I closed my eyes and clenched my fists, ready for what would come next. But instead of the pain and horror I expected, I felt only a warm touch. When I opened my eyes, I found myself on the snowy road, my car slowly moving forward. I breathed a sigh of relief, realizing it was just a nightmare, a dream from which I had managed to escape. But as I looked back, I saw faint traces behind my car leading to that mysterious house, as if reminding me that there are places in this world better left unexplored. I stepped on the gas, speeding away, trying to put as much distance between myself and that place as possible. But the shadow I saw in the nightmare still traveled with me, as if to say we would meet again. On the vast roads where cities and people lose their significance, time flows differently. It's a world ruled by solitude, where silence pierces the soul and distances seem endless. I immersed myself in this atmosphere as I made my way through the silent expanses devoid of human noise. However, this time something interrupted my solitude. On the roadside, like a lost spirit, stood a man, stretching out his hand and hitchhiking. My initial instinct was to drive past, as many would in such a situation. But something about this person made me stop. As I approached him, he turned, as if expecting someone. His gaze was tired, and his face expressed exhaustion. Without a word, I opened the door and invited him to sit in my car. He silently accepted my offer and took a seat beside me. During our journey, I noticed that he avoided eye contact, as if trying to escape from something. We didn't exchange a single word or even a glance. The silence in the car was so tense that it could be felt in the air. After some time, I tried to start a conversation to alleviate the tension that hung between us. I asked him where he was from and where he was headed, but his answers were short and vague. He avoided giving me any information about himself. As we continued moving forward, I began to sense something unknown, something ominous in his presence. It was like a dark cloud hanging over our heads, ready to descend upon us at any moment. When the sun began to set below the horizon, I decided to stop and spend the night by the roadside. But even when we stopped, he remained silent and distant. I felt that something sinister surrounded him, but I couldn't understand what exactly. The next morning, as we got back into the car, I felt waves of tension growing stronger. I could no longer ignore the dark aura that enveloped our journey. Something was wrong, and I could feel it in every fiber of my being. But before I could say anything, he suddenly turned to me, his eyes gleaming like coals, and his lips curved into a sinister smile. "You've fallen into a trap," he hissed, his voice filled with malice. I realized I had made a mistake picking up this stranger on my car. Darkness and madness gleamed in his eyes, and I felt fear gripping me entirely. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling with tension. "You're leading me straight to her," he hissed, pointing ahead down the road. My hands clenched on the wheel, and I knew I had no choice. The stranger was connected to something sinister that awaited us ahead, and I couldn't allow him to lead me to that fate. Together we moved along the road, like two passengers on a hellish tram, knowing that the final stop was approaching but fearing to look it in the face. As we continued, the surrounding nature became increasingly grim and eerie. The trees seemed distorted, their branches reaching out to us, thirsting for our blood. The stranger sat next to me, his presence filling the car with cold and horror. I realized I couldn't stay with him any longer than necessary. Finally, we arrived at the place he indicated. It was an old abandoned house in the middle of a forest, its walls emitting an aura of evil, and I felt primal instincts awakening inside me. "What is this place?" I asked, unwilling to believe what I saw. The stranger didn't answer, only pointing at the house. I knew I had to act quickly before the fear and evil of this place consumed me entirely. Carefully, I got out of the car, ready to confront whatever might be lurking in this forsaken, cursed place. Rising to my feet, I slowly approached the abandoned house, feeling the cold wind piercing my skin and disrupting my thoughts. Mixed feelings of fear and determination surged within me. I knew something sinister lurked within these walls, but I needed to uncover the truth. Entering the house, I felt the darkness enveloping me from all sides. There was little light, and I walked forward, cautiously scanning my surroundings. The walls of the room seemed imbued with a grim history, and the air was filled with an atmosphere of evil, as if the curse of this place permeated every corner. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper emanating from the darkness of the corners. The words were indistinct, but their sound pierced me, causing the hairs on the back of my neck to stand on end. I stopped, listening intently, but the whisper ceased as soon as I approached its source. Continuing my journey, I ventured deeper into the house where I found a locked door. Knocking and cries echoed from within, as if someone was pleading for help. My heart pounded harder as I realized that the decision to intervene had to be made here and now. Summoning all my courage, I broke down the door and entered the room. There, in the darkness, I saw a figure shrouded in shadow. Its eyes gleamed in the darkness, emitting unspeakable horror. I understood that this creature had been imprisoned here for many years, subjected to unimaginable torment, but as I approached to offer help, The shadow suddenly vanished, as if it were nothing but a ghost of the past. My heart froze, and I realized that something much darker and more dangerous lurked within this cursed house than I could have imagined. Surrounded by darkness and horror, I dashed towards the exit, desperate to leave this place of damnation. But the door slammed shut before me, depriving me of my freedom. I felt the walls closing in, as if they were intent on consuming me whole. Through the darkness and cold, I fought for survival. And in this struggle against evil, I realized that in the world of Stephen King, even the darkest corners can summon forth monsters that feed on human fear and despair. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might leap out of my chest. I understood that in this place there were not only sinister forces but something that surpassed my understanding of reality. Darkness consumed me, and I could feel it gnawing at my soul, seeking to engulf me forever. But suddenly, as if in response to my hopeless despair, a sharp light filled the room. I shut my eyes, feeling the blinding rays piercing the darkness around me. When I opened my eyes, I found myself sitting in my car, on the road stretching into the distance. At first, I couldn't comprehend what had happened. It all seemed like a nightmare I had just endured. But as I began to grasp my surroundings, I realized it was something more. I was safe, but the shadow of the mysterious house still haunted me in my thoughts. For the next few hours, I continued along the road, trying to leave behind that nightmarish house and all it represented. But even as I convinced myself it was all just a dream, deep down, I felt the lingering sense that darkness still awaited me in the shadows. Finally, when I reached the town and immersed myself in its familiar atmosphere, I felt somewhat calmer. But even there, among people and light, I knew that the shadows of the past still pursued me, reminding me that Stephen King's world stretches far beyond the pages of his books, encompassing every corner of our reality. And so ended my strange and horrifying experience, leaving me with endless questions and an indescribable sense of fear. I will never forget that night. And even now, when I see the shadow of the house passing by, I know it's still there, waiting for its next victim. For many hours, I traversed my way through endless expanses, remote from the bustle of cities and the chaos of everyday life. The road wound through silent forests and vast fields, surrounded only by shimmering stars and immersed in captivating silence. With each passing kilometer, I felt time stretching, as if eternity permeated every moment of my journey. Loneliness became my companion, and the sounds of nature filled my soul with incredible tranquility. However, throughout all these endless miles, I had not seen a soul until one day. At sunset, my gaze fell upon a speck of life in the sea of lifeless space. Standing on the roadside was a man, extending his hand and waving, hitchhiking. My heart skipped a beat as I approached him. Such an unexpected encounter with a living being in this desolate land seemed unreal, but I couldn't leave him alone on this deserted road. Pulling up next to him, I cracked open the window and asked, "Do you need help?" He nodded, and I invited him to take a seat in my car. As he sat beside me, I noticed that his clothes were tattered, and his face expressed weariness and exhaustion. "Where are you headed?" I asked, as we set off again. He pointed westward, towards the sunset, and replied, "Wherever the road takes me, just further." We continued our journey in silence, and I felt that in his presence there was something incomprehensible, like a puzzle I was trying to solve. Occasionally I tried to strike up a conversation, but his answers were brief and enigmatic. After some time, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, I decided to stop for the night at a small motel on the roadside. I invited him to spend the night in one of the rooms. He agreed, but as we entered the room, I noticed a hint of uncertainty in his gaze, and his body tensed as if anticipating something bad. "Are you all right?" I asked, concerned about his state. He nodded, but in his eyes, I saw a shadow of fear that unsettled me. Something was wrong, and I resolved to find out what it was. "What happened?" I insisted. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I just don't want to be alone." His words sounded like a plea for help, and I realized that he needed my support. We spent the night in silence, but I felt that my presence comforted him and brought some solace. The next morning, as I took the wheel again, he calmly took his place beside me. We continued our journey together, like two travelers whose fates had been brought together on this road. As we moved forward, I realized that this was not just a chance encounter on the road. We were connected by a shared need for companionship in this silence and solitude. And although we may never know the true nature of this meeting, I knew that it would leave a lasting mark on my heart, reminding me that sometimes the road of life leads us to people who need our help and support.